Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to this FR InFocus webinar. My name is Martin Mwebia, and I work as Education Support Manager here at ACCA, and I'm pleased to be joined by FR expert tutor, Cara Barrett. Hi, Cara.
Hello there.
Great. So this session today is designed to support you with your financial reporting preparation, where Cara will share her insights to help you with your preparation for this exam. The webinar will cover the December 23 examiner's report using technical examples, as well as some useful tips which will further help you during your exam practice. Now, please take the opportunity to type in your questions, as we have a team in the back end to respond as the webinar continues. And then Cara will answer some of the most frequently asked questions towards the end of the session. Before I hand over to Cara, I'd like to just cover a few housekeeping items. So there are a couple of buttons on your screen that will be useful to you in this session. There's a help icon on the left, and that provides the resources and information to resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There's also some icons for the slides and the media player. Ensure you can see both of these. If you'd like to engage with us or your fellow attendees, please use the attendee chat function. And these are public forums, so please do not share any personal details. There is an icon that looks like a file symbol, and that contains the resources that are relevant to today's webinar, including any direct links. Remember, you can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And in case at any point you can't hear what we're saying, or you can't see any visuals, or if you experience a lag between the audio and the video, please do refresh your browser. Now, if you've registered for this webinar, that means you receive an email tomorrow with a link to listen in to the recording. So don't worry much if you miss out on any part of the session. So I'm going to hand over to Cara in a moment, and I'll be back with you at the end of the session. Please remember, if you'd like to ask us or Cara a question, use the Q&A button, and we're going to try our best to respond to your questions. So Cara, over to you now.
Great. Thank you very much, Martin, and hello, everybody. Let me start by introducing myself in case we haven't met. As Martin said, my name is Cara Barrett, and I have been helping people like you to pass accountancy exams for well over 20 years now, which probably makes me sound very old, actually. But not only that, I have also helped to train tutors to teach people like you to pass their accountancy exams. And I work with lots and lots of institutes to help them develop their syllabus, develop their learning solutions, develop their assessment materials. So I've spent quite a long time doing this kind of thing and have a bit of insight for you. Now, as Martin said, we've got a little bit of an agenda today, so let me just run you through that. We are going to spend the bulk of our session today really thinking about the examiner's report and how useful it can be. And for that, we're really going to focus on the most recent examiner's report, which is available on the FR part of the website. So that is the September-December 2023 hybrid examiner's report. After that, we'll just pick up on some common mistakes that students make in their FR exam and how you can therefore avoid them. And then, as Martin said, we'll wrap up with some live Q&As. Now, also during the session on the examiner's report, I've got a couple of videos to share with you. So whilst those videos are playing, I'm actually going to dart into the background and join the Q&A team in answering your questions. So as Martin said, please do keep those coming. I will spend time dealing with as many as I can, and I'm not saying that's going to be all of them by any means, because we do tend to get loads of questions. But what I can do then is I can pick up some really common ones to share with everybody at the end in that live Q&A. Anyway, let's get started with the examiner's report section of our webinar, and in particular how you can use it now to help improve your mark in your exam. But what I actually want to start with is a quick poll, because I'm really interested to know how many of you have actually already looked at examiner's reports, or how many of you intend to look at them, or how many of you perhaps haven't really thought about doing that at all, don't feel that that's important. So let me launch a poll now. There it comes. And if you can just hit your answer as quickly as possible, it's all anonymous. but it just gives me a feel for what everybody thinks about examiners' reports and whether they've had a chance to look at the most recent. So go ahead and make your selection. Here they come. They started coming in now, so that's obviously open the poll. So just hit your choice, please. And then when we've got a majority of answers, I will stop the poll and we'll see what everyone thinks about that. That's about a third of you now submitted an answer. See if we can hit at least half and then we will move on. Okay. Okay, let's see what the majority of you think there. There we go. 17% of you, just over 17% of you have read the latest examiner's report. Fantastic. Very well done, you. Majority of you, though, there, 76%, intend to. You know it's there, but you haven't quite got around to doing it. And then about 6% of you, you've not done and you don't plan to. Well, in particular, those of you who haven't yet looked at it, I'm going to hopefully help you just focus what you should be looking at in examiners' reports, the most recent one, but also previous examiners' reports. Don't forget, there's plenty available on the website. And hopefully I can go a little way to convincing the 6% of you that didn't intend to look at an examiner's report that actually it can be really useful and you can pick up some really good stuff there. But let's just take a slight step backwards and think about, for those of you who haven't seen one, what's in the examiner's report? What kind of information would you find there? So what you've got on the screen there is a screenshot, basically, of the most recent examiner's report. You can see that there's a list of contents. First of all, at the top there, you have section A and section B, of course, replicating your exam, which is section A, section B, and section C. And you can see under each of those headings, there are listed a number of questions. There are 4 questions for section A and 5 for section B. Now, this is massively important because actually this is the only place that you can access real exam OTQs. When you go into the practice platform to have a look at past exam papers, you will see that they are only section C questions. There's no section A or section B there. So these examiners' reports are your opportunity to access real OTQs. So the examiner selects 4 section A questions, which he thinks people have found particularly tricky, and then 1 entire mini case study from section B is replicated together with the associated questions. So massively important to look at those. What do I suggest you do with those? Well, if I were you, I would sit those as if you were sitting an exam. I would do those OTQs that are provided to you to time. Then I would go back and, in effect, mark them using the examiner's report and review the examiner's commentary on those questions. And in a minute, I'll talk about the kind of commentary that you will see for section A and section B questions. At the bottom, though, of that slide there, of that extract from the examiner's report, you can see section C is listed. So for section C in the examiner's report, there are 2 questions covered. The examiner does not replicate those questions in the examiner's report, and that's because you can access them on the practice platform. So it would be a waste to replicate them. So you do need to look at the examiner's report together with the practice platform, really, when it comes to section C. One of those questions will be an analysis question. One of those questions will be an accounts preparation question. So that reflects what you will see in your exam. You will see an analysis question. You will see an accounts preparation question. So one of each, and then the examiner in effect walks you through the question. And again, we'll talk about the kind of walkthrough shortly. But what do I suggest you do with that particular part of the examiner's report? Well, if I were you, I would go into the practice platform, I would have a go at those section C questions, then self-mark them. And again, you can use the practice platform to do that. You have the functionality to self-mark, then come back and review the examiner's report. And as I say, we'll talk about what's in the report in a moment. But what you will find is that you can pick up 2 things really from the examiner's report. First of all, you can learn some tips on good exam technique. So the examiner will give you some tips on how you should approach questions, how you should perhaps approach the exam. Second thing you can pick up is some technical knowledge, some technical tips. So the examiner will focus in on areas that perhaps students found hard and explain them. So use that as a learning tool. The bottom line is, if the examiner's got it in the examiner's report, he expects you to know it. So learn from that. Okay, let's just very, very briefly talk about what you might see in terms of section A and B first. What I don't want to do here, though, is I don't want to spend massive amounts of time pulling apart questions that you've been given in this particular examiner's report. And that's because, as I say, this is the only place you can access real OTQs. And so it's really valuable to you to do those OTQs as questions rather than me talk through them. But what you will see is, first of all, the question itself. So I've literally just copied and pasted that from the examiner's report we're talking about. I'm not going to talk about the detail of that question. So you'll get the question itself. You will then be told what it tests. So the examiner focuses in on which particular syllabus area is being tested. And actually what you can pick up there is quite how much coverage of the syllabus the examiner can achieve in sections A and B. Now, you know that FR has quite a meaty syllabus, nice big size syllabus, lots to cover. And because quite a bulk of the exam is OTQs, lots of topics can be tested, and you will see that through the examiner's report. So my message to you really there is, please don't cherry pick what you are going to learn. Anything is fair game. Also in the examiner's report, though, you will be told the correct answer, but not only that, what's more important is an explanation of that correct answer. So that's where you can pick up some of those technical tips. You can pick up IFRS knowledge that perhaps you weren't quite sure of. And then the very last thing in terms of section A and B questions that you will be told is where candidates tended to go wrong. And actually, that's also really useful, because what you can do is make sure you don't go wrong in the same areas. So in effect, you are learning from other people's misfortune. You are learning from their mistakes. But actually, sometimes that is the best way to learn. So section A and B, I'm going to leave there, but I'm really, really going to suggest that it's a great idea, as I say, to have a go at those questions and then look back and mark them. Let's move on to section C, though. So what do you get for section C? Well, you'll get an overview of each question. I did say you won't get the question replicated, but you will get an overview of the question in the examiner's report. And then for each sub-requirement, the examiner will walk you through what was being tested, what you should have done, what was done well, and what was done badly. And again, that is where you can, in effect, learn from other people's mistakes, but also make sure that if everybody else is doing something well, you can do it well also. So you're putting yourself up there with the bulk of the candidates. Now, in terms of section C questions that are covered in the September-December examiner's report, what I actually want to do is just take each of them in turn and just run a quick video. And in those videos, I'm just going to show you how you can use the examiner's report to pick up technique and technical IFRS tips. So the first video, which I'm about to press play on, is the analysis question. I appreciate you might not have seen the exam. Don't worry about that at all. It really, really doesn't matter. You will still understand how valuable this examiner's report can be. So I will press play, and as I say, I'm going to dart into the background. I'm going to answer some Q&A. So if you have a burning question, pop it in the Q&A section now, and I will hopefully spot it and reply. So here we go with this first video. Well, in section C of the September-December 23 exam, we are told there are two questions: Plundle, a financial statements analysis and interps question for a group, and Gibraltar, which is a single entity financial statements prep question. So let's have a look at the first of those, the interps question, Plundle, first of all. And what does the examiner's report tell us about this? Well, first of all, we have this little bit of background information about the question. So in case you haven't seen it, just a quick glance there. We have a group that holds 100% of a particular subsidiary, Holloway, as well as other subsidiaries, and it received an offer to sell that. So it's considering an offer to sell 100% owned subsidiary. We've been told that some consolidated financial statements have been prepared and they are given to us there. And then we've been given some additional information. And on the right-hand side, you can see you've got requirements to A, calculate the gain or loss on this potential disposal of the 100% subsidiary Holloway for 5 marks. B, make necessary adjustments and recalculate some ratios, 3 ratios there, 2 profit margins and interest cover for 4 marks. And then finally 11 marks for analysing the performance of the Plundell Group for the years 20XD7, 20XD8, particularly referring to the potential disposal of Holloway, that 100% sub. So that's our requirement. Now, what I thought we'd do first in terms of the examiner's report is just pull out some technique pointers from the examiner that you can take forward into your FR exam. And then we'll just come back and pick out some of the technical issues that the examiner's picked up. And you can just see how the examiner is helping you to understand those and also hopefully take away some technical knowledge. But technique pointers first. If I scroll down, I've done some highlighting here. The first thing that just jumps out, and this is a bit of an overview from the examiner, analysis and interps is absolutely an important area of the syllabus. We know it'll continue to be examined. We know it will be a Section C question. But look at that. Candidates failed to score high marks, and that's quite common, the examiner tells us. And the reason appears to be poor exam technique. In particular, not addressing the requirement or not adequately using the information in the scenario. And that second point, we hear that over and over again from the examiner. When answering an interps question, you must refer to the background information that you have been given. And we're going to see that mentioned again later as we scroll on. So in terms of that first requirement, remember that was calculating a gain or loss on disposal of Holloway, the subsidiary. What's the technique pointer coming out of that? If I just scroll down again, I have highlighted it. And the technique pointer for you to take forward is that you absolutely must show your workings for calculations. As you can see there, the examiner tells us when workings are shown, marks can be awarded. However, many candidates don't show workings. They didn't in this case, and they could not get marks. So remember, please, OFR, own figure rule. What that means to the markers is that if you show your workings and you make a bit of a mistake, you can still get credit. Even though the final answer is not correct, certain elements of the calculation will be. And if the marker can see those elements, they can mark them correctly. You can get part of the marks. So please, please, please show workings. Again, if I scroll down, so here the problem really boils down to RTQ, read the question. So to give us the background there, the examiner tells us that what candidates were supposed to do was remove all transactions from the statement of profit or loss that were associated with this sub that was potentially being sold, and then recalculate the ratios. But look at the second sentence there on the second page. Some candidates ignored this, calculated ratios using unadjusted amounts, and so could not score any marks. And actually those unadjusted ratios were already given in the case. So what a waste of precious time. So please, 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 RTQ, read the question very, very carefully. Make sure that you are doing what you are being asked to do. Again, if I scroll down, we're still within this section on ratio calculation, and this is going back to the idea of showing workings. Again, increasingly there, candidates are showing workings, so can score well. However, the marking team noted many candidates did not. That second paragraph where the ratios have been calculated correctly, even without workings, you will get your marks. However, if you calculate the wrong number, if there are no workings, you can score nothing. Very, very important to show working. So we've seen that message now twice in this particular part of the examiner's report. It's absolutely vital you get your workings down in the constructed response area. Remember, not on the scratch pad. That is not marked. Now, requirement C was the analysis, the discussion really. And if I again scroll down, this is a problem over and over again. Candidates make generic comments on analysis, a textbook rationale not linked to the case. So you must refer to the information that you are given in the case study. Do not simply say something generic such as the gross profit margin has increased. This could be because selling prices have gone up. It's absolutely fine to say that if there's an indication in the scenario that selling prices have gone up, but otherwise it has no value. Just reciting possible explanations from your textbook is not good practice. Again, if I scroll down, something else that we've seen recently, the first paragraph there, several candidates copy content from the scenario, and then they actually don't add any value to it. They just use wording from the scenario, cut and paste in many cases actually, to try and describe what's going on, to try and explain what's going on. So that's not going to score you any marks unless you add to that, unless you say why it is relevant, why it impacts the ratio. Second paragraph on the page there, many candidates provided an extremely brief analysis or none whatsoever. Again, this is something that we see too much of, and that's candidates not even having a go at the analysis. Now, could it be down to poor time management? Could it be down to just not liking analysis? It could be down to both of those things. So it's absolutely crucial that you stick to time. It's crucial that you practice analysis now, because you will have an analysis question. Now, if I scroll down again, last 2 points here on technique. The first one on the page there just reiterates that there is loads of useful information in the scenario that you should draw on when explaining your movements in ratio. And of course, that's a point that we have mentioned. And then that very, very last point, this is really important from a technique point of view. Make sure that you give a conclusion in an analysis question. There will be a mark going for it. So please make it clear that you have done that. Add a heading, show your marker. This is a conclusion, and essentially conclude on what you have said. Right, now let's pick up on a couple of technical pointers. Now, in terms of technical takeaways from this examiner's report on this particular question, Plundle, Part A was the gain or loss on disposal. You can see I've highlighted there, the examiner spotted that many candidates didn't do very well on this, and they didn't even have a go in some cases at this requirement. So the examiners decided that might well be because candidates did not know how to calculate the gain or loss on disposal. And so the disposal calculation, the pro forma of it, has been replicated in this examiner's report. So that's a useful technical takeaway. Make sure that you know that. Just to point out, you might know your disposal calculation in a slightly different format. Here it's given as proceeds plus the NCI, less the carrying amount of the sub's net assets, less the carrying amount of the sub's goodwill. You might actually adjust for the NCI a little bit lower down. So you might have proceeds less, and then a sub calculation, net assets of the subsidiary plus goodwill of the subsidiary less the NCI in total. Doesn't matter on the format. What drops out the bottom is still gain or loss. Now, the examiner also in this report just points out what went wrong for candidates in this particular question. And that's something that you should look at after having a go at the question itself. But just to pull out a couple of things which are just useful to look at. If I scroll back up here, the examiner said that many candidates adjusted for an NCI, even though this was a 100% owned sub. So that really goes back to RTQ, read the question, make sure that you know what you're dealing with. And then if I scroll down, we have various elements here of the calculation that went wrong for candidates, things like omitting a fair value adjustment for land. So again, that's down to making sure that you read the question really carefully and read the details. Not going to go through all of those because I think it's really important that you have a go at this question before reading them. So please do go away and do that if you haven't already done so. If I just look at requirement B, though, which was our ratio calculation, now, the technical issues here were to do with making the adjustments to the statement of profit or loss. But actually, the takeaway technical point here is not only relevant in a ratios question. There was an impairment in this question. A cumulative amount was given and a current year amount was given. And candidates adjusted profit in some cases for the cumulative amount. Remember, whenever you are dealing with a group scenario, cumulative amounts adjust the statement of financial position, single year amounts adjust statement of profit or loss. So that's really relevant in a consolidation accounts prep question. So I'd say that is the technical takeaway, even though it's coming out of a ratios requirement. So a couple of good technical takeaways, as well as plenty of good technique takeaways from this particular question. And even though it's an examiner's report on specific questions from the September-December 23 hybrid exam, these points are really relevant to you going forward. And that's why reading the examiner's report is really valuable. Okay, so that was the analysis question then from the September-December hybrid examiner's report. And as I say, lots of really useful points popping out there, and you see the themes coming over and over again. Show your workings, refer to the scenario when explaining what's going on, explaining movements in ratios. So the more examiner's reports you read, the more of the same themes you are going to pick up, and you will see quite how important these things are to the examiner. What about the next question, though? The next question, and before I just talk about this, I am just going to pick up very briefly on section C and the contents, the areas covered in section C, because I've just answered a few questions on this in the Q&As. Section C will contain an analysis question, analysis interpretation, whatever you want to call it. So yes, in answer to those people asking, will there definitely be an interpretation analysis question? Yes, there will. It will also contain an accounts preparation question. Now, groups is a massive part of the syllabus. So one of those questions is going to be groups. It could be analysis of groups, as we've just seen, or it could be accounts preparation, consolidated accounts preparation. The other question will be an individual company. So it could be individual company analysis or individual company accounts preparation. So in effect, you will have two types of question. One will be groups, one will be individuals. So in this particular exam, just to come back to what's on the screen, in this particular exam, obviously analysis was groups. So accounts preparation is a single entity. So we'll have a little video on this in a minute, but just the background really. What you are given for single company accounts preparation questions, and this is very, very typical, this is what you got in this exam, is a trial balance and then a list of additional information. And then your requirement is very, very unlikely to be prepare all of the financial statements. It's likely to be a SOFP or an SPL and OCI. And in this case, it's an SPL OCI and a statement of changes in equity. So just picking up on that little bit of the SOFP as well. And actually in this particular question, you also had a little add-on, which was to do some earnings per share calculations. So that's kind of the background to the next question we're going to look at from September-December 24. Now, before we launch into a video, one thing that I just want to pull out is a suggested approach to this type of question. And the examiner, again, the more examiner's reports you read, the more you pick up on themes. And the examiner very often gives you a good approach to accounts preparation questions. So what I've done really in the next couple of slides is pull together guidance from the examiner from other reports, even though it's really mentioned in this report as well, but slightly more in brief. So with an accounts preparation question, your best approach is to first of all set up your required pro formas. So I've said in this particular instance, they are looking for an SPL with OCI and a statement of changes in equity. So set up those skeleton pro formas. That means you need to learn those pro formas now if you do not already know them. Then go down the trial balance that you've been provided with and insert balances into the appropriate places in those pro formas, or perhaps into workings if you feel that there's a lot going on and you're going to need a working. Now, those are really easy marks. Nobody's ever going to say that just doing that will give you enough marks to pass, but by golly, those are easy marks that you can grab before you spend time chasing the harder marks. And actually, if I just throw in here an extract from the examiner's report that deals with those two stages, this is what the examiner said at the bottom there. Candidates are not provided with a pro forma, and so you're advised to firstly create that in the constructed response area provided. The amounts relating to profit or loss can then be transferred from the TB, ready for adjustments. There will be some adjustments, some figures won't be adjusted, but here's the important thing: non-complex marks can be achieved by entering the trial balance amount. So that's just the examiner reiterating what I have just said. Once you've done that, then you move on and you deal with the adjustments. So say you have a list of 8 adjustments. The really, really important thing is to make sure you deal with the easiest ones first. And sometimes that's the last one. So you might look at the last one and think, oh, I can do that in 2 minutes. Do it first then. Don't get bogged down in the really detailed adjustment to do with, I don't know, a revaluation with depreciation, whatever it happens to be. Deal with the easiest first, get easy marks. That's the key thing. And the examiner also says, in terms of those adjustments, and again, some of you have been asking questions about this, what you can do for the adjustments is you can, in effect, do your workings within the cell. So put amounts from the TB and then make adjustments within a cell as a calculation. Markers do check cell contents. The only thing I would say about that approach is if you are typing numbers into the cell so that the spreadsheet can do the calculation for you, you cannot add words. So you cannot add, for example, a working reference. You cannot, for example, add, say you're doing consolidation, the words intercompany or goodwill impairment or whatever it happens to be. So you can't signpost your marker as to what the number is. And therefore, if the number isn't right and the marker doesn't really know what that number is or where it came from, they can't give you a mark. Whereas if you've signposted it, if you've told them what the number is, then they are more likely to be able to say, oh yes, I can see that working deals with that issue. I'm going to give some own figure rule marks. So just be careful about that approach. The second approach the examiner suggests, and that's the second bullet point there, is to use columns for draft amounts, adjustments, and final amounts. So within your spreadsheet. And then the final way, showing a manual working, it says as shown below there. I appreciate we don't have it as shown below, but in effect, a little sub-working is what the examiner's suggesting. Now, which of those works best for you is something that you will have to practice. So that columnar approach, for example, you might never have thought of doing that. Maybe have a go, have a practice when you do a particular question, see if it works for you. If it doesn't, stick to your previous method. So do what works for you, but do please, please show your adjustments, show the workings. Very final thing to do there is to close the financial statements off. Now, you don't tend to get marks for closing the financial statements off. If there was, say, 1.5 marks for, let's say, PPE figure, and that was brought forward and then take off depreciation and take off an impairment, if you've shown those 3 elements in brackets, but you haven't got a final figure on the right-hand side, you can still access the full 1.5 marks. So you don't need to close everything off in the financial statements to access marks. However, if you need to transfer a balance, so for example, a profit figure into the statement of changes in equity, obviously you do need to close things off. And in that case, own figure rule stands. If you get to the wrong profit number, as long as you take it to the right place, you can still access the relevant half mark. Okay, so that's a bit of technique in terms of accounts preparation, particularly for a single entity question. In the examiner's report here, what they really do is home in on technical IFRS issues. So I just want to play another video to just showcase, we're going to dart between the practice platform and the examiner's report, but to showcase how useful some of this technical information that the examiner gives you can be. So I'm going to dart back into the questions now whilst you watch this video. Well, in this section, Section C accounts prep question, as well as give you an approach to the question, the examiner has given you a really good walk through the technical points, the IFRS learning points coming out of this question. So what I thought we'd do is just pick up on a couple of those and see how useful they can be, and also grab some takeaway learning points. So what the examiner does is take each of these pieces of additional information that come after the trial balance in this question and walk through them, explaining what the accounting treatment should be, what the candidates should have done in the exam. So really, really useful. Let's have a look at number 1, which tells us in October XD3, and our year end is the 31st of October, Gibraltar received $350,000 from a customer for arranging some services. This has been recorded as revenue. Gibraltar doesn't provide the services but uses a third party to do so. And in terms of the payment there, Gibraltar retains 12% of what's been received as commission and pays the balance to the third party 1 month in arrears. So what does the examiner say about that point? Well, the issue here is a principal versus agent issue, so an IFRS 15 issue. And actually, this is something that comes up quite a bit in these accounts prep questions, and that's one of the reasons why I picked this adjustment. So Gibraltar, we're told, has incorrectly recognised $350,000, but actually all they've done is arrange the provision of the services, and they're going to be earning 12% of that $350,000, and that means actually they should only record 12% as their own revenue. So that, as you can see, there is $42,000. So in effect, what has to happen here is the extra $308,000 has to be reversed out of revenue. Now, you can see there that the examiner in this report has given you the journal entry, so debit revenue to reduce it by the $308,000 and credit trade and other payables because that amount has to be paid over to the other party that is providing the services, so it's currently a liability. You are absolutely not required to list journal entries in an accounts preparation question. This is the examiner trying to really help you understand what's going on by providing these journal entries. So that's one reason why this examiner's report is so useful. In terms of preparing the accounts, however, in this question, you would be deducting $308,000 from revenue. And if I just scroll down, you can see that happening here. This is how you would show it. The examiner has got it bracketed. And then adding that into a SOFP, although we are not preparing a SOFP here. So quite a standard adjustment, a great technical point to take away. If your company is acting as an agent in a sale transaction, they should only record commission as revenue. Let's have a look at another example of a transaction that the examiner walks you through. Well, this time I'm jumping down to number 4. We're told the fair value of some fair value through OCI investments, so we're in IFRS 9 territory, includes a purchase in the year, and the costs of $8,000 associated with the purchase were charged to admin expenses. At the year end, the fair value of the investments was $124,750, which is still to be recognised. If I just scan up to the TB, you can see that the investments there start off life at $120,000 in the trial balance. So what does the examiner have to say about that particular adjustment number 4? Well, there are 2 separate things to think about here. First of all, the initial costs to do with the purchase of the investments, and secondly, the remeasurement to fair value. And the examiner takes each of those in turn, so really holding your hand through the process that you should have gone through if you were doing this question. So first of all, you can see on the screen here, the costs associated with the purchase have been incorrectly charged to admin expenses. And you might be thinking, oh, why is that incorrect? So the examiner goes on to tell you, if an investment is classified as fair value through OCI, transaction costs are capitalized. They form part of the cost of that financial asset. And therefore, what should have happened is that the investments should have jumped into the debit entry when the investments were first bought. However, instead they were debited to admin expenses. So you can see the correction adjustment there, again, given to you in the format of a journal, even though the examiner does not expect you to give that format in the question. This is helping you out. The correction journal is to debit investments to jump the 8,000 onto the balance, and then credit admin expenses to reduce that by 8,000. So of course, in your accounts preparation question, it's an SPL that you're doing, you would adjust that 8,000 in the admin expenses line, but you wouldn't have to process the debit entry. The second thing is to remeasure the instruments to fair value. And if we scroll down a little, you can see what the examiners said there. There is a fair value loss of $3,250, and you can see how that is calculated. So the $124,750, remember we were given that as the fair value at the year end, less the carrying amount before the fair value adjustment, and that was 120,000, but don't forget it should have been 128,000 because those transaction costs should have jumped onto that initial measurement. So hence it drops out at a 3,250 change in value. And actually in this case, it is a reduction in value. You can see again, you've been given the journal entry that you're not required to give, but it's really helpful to help understand. So there is a debit to OCI, which will end up in equity in the revaluation surplus for fair value through OCI instruments. And there is a credit, a reduction to the carrying amount of those instruments in the SOFP. So again, what you are going to be doing in preparing the accounts is the debit entry to the SPLOCI, so it's going to OCI as in effect an expense in OCI. Now, the examiner's report is always really good as well at telling us what candidates did wrong, where they were tripped up. And you can see at the bottom there, some candidates incorrectly recognised a fair value gain of 4,750. In other words, they actually forgot to adjust the TB amount, or didn't realise they had to adjust the TB amount for the extra 8,000 transaction costs. But look at that. Own figure marks were awarded providing that workings were shown, so back to the importance of workings. But the technical point to take away there is that with financial assets that are classified as measured at fair value through OCI, transaction costs must be added to the initial cost of the asset. Okay, one last adjustment. For this last adjustment, let's look at number 5, because again, this has a great learning point to take forward within it. Gibraltar has made a decision to measure land and buildings at fair value for the first time. So the revaluation model is going to be kicking in. At the year end, the fair value of land was $1 million. The fair value of buildings was $700,000. No adjustments been made to reflect that revaluation or the related deferred tax, and the tax rate is 21%. So you have that massive clue on the end there that not only are you going to have to record the revaluation, you have to think about the tax as well. So deferred tax does have a habit of creeping in, normally in a relatively minor way, but it does creep into these accounts prep questions. Now, before we just look at what the examiner said about this point, we should just have a look up at the TB and see what the initial measurement of the land and buildings was. So you can see there the carrying amount at the year end before the adjustment to fair value, 800 and 476 for the buildings. So let's see the examiner's report on this point now. Well, you can see there that the first point that the examiner makes is that the actual revaluation and the adjustment required for it was non-complex. So that was really easy marks, is effectively what you are being told. So all that you have to do is, in effect, calculation similar to the one that the examiner has done there within the report to calculate the uplift from the initial carrying amount after depreciation that you're given in the trial balance to fair value. And you can see there's a revaluation gain of 424,000. And that, of course, has to be recorded as ever. We're given the journal entry by debiting the land and buildings. We're not preparing a SOFP. You're not going to be processing that. But the credit entry, that's really important. That's going to OCI and being labelled in effect as a revaluation surplus on PPE. So the credit entry, the 424 in the first journal there, is going to jump into your SPLOCI. The second point, though, the one that I really wanted to focus on, is the fact that there is going to be a deferred tax impact of the revaluation. So remember, deferred tax arises when there's a difference between the carrying amount of an asset and its tax base. And when an asset is revalued upwards, there is a sudden jump in the carrying amount, but no adjustment to tax base, which of course means there is a sudden taxable temporary difference, and therefore a deferred tax liability arises. Now, the key thing here, most people, once they've fathomed that out, can apply the tax rate and get, in this case, 89,040. But the key thing here is that because the revaluation is recognised in other comprehensive income, the tax effect is also recognised in other comprehensive income. So here, where you are given the journal entry, the debit is actually to OCI. So to reach the revaluation surplus that you're given there, it has to travel through OCI. That's the bit that's relevant to your accounts that are being prepared here. So an expense in OCI of 89,040. The credit side is going off to be a deferred tax liability, but that is not relevant to this particular accounts prep question. So again, we've got the common errors pulled out there by the examiner, and a really common error was to put that deferred tax expense through profit or loss rather than other comprehensive income. So be really, really very careful about that. That's a great technical learning point. Deferred tax on a revaluation is calculated by multiplying the tax rate by the revaluation surplus and then recognizing the resulting deferred tax liability in other comprehensive income. So I've managed to go through 3 of the technical points there in the time allowed, but you can see how useful this layout is in terms of learning. So it would be a really good idea if you could have a go at this question on the practice platform and then come back and just work through these examiner's comments and make sure that you really have a hang of all of those adjustments and you are very happy with the technical content. Okay, so some really good points there coming from the examiner, and hopefully you're starting to understand how useful it is to learn from examiners' reports, and particularly these technical points that you might have missed. Anyway, let's just move on. Before we move on, I'm just going to pick up on something that's come through the questions. When I refer to OTQ, that's an objective test question. That's what you see in section A and section B. You might know them as MCQs, multiple choice questions, although of course not all take that format. Anyway, let's just move on to a very short session on avoiding common mistakes. And actually, some of these we have picked up on, and I have picked up on through answering your questions as well. Common mistakes before the exam, so things that you should not do. Not getting familiar with the software. So what you need to do is not make that mistake. In other words, you need to get familiar with the software you're going to use. To do that, use the practice platform as much as you can when you're doing practice questions. At the start of the exams on the practice platform, there are instructions. Take some time to read a set of instructions now, and then have a play. Have a play in that practice platform. Make sure you know how it works. Make sure that it's just completely second nature to use it. And that's going to put you in a more confident position when you go into your exam. Another common mistake is not practicing enough or practicing effectively. So what should you be doing now? Well, you should be doing questions and indeed full exams when you have time to time. Afterwards, don't just do them. Do something with them afterwards. Self-mark them and learn from your mistakes. Make use of those past exams on the practice platform as well. Do as many as you possibly can. And then, as we've said, look at them in conjunction with the examiner's reports. So that's before the exam. Common mistakes that you should avoid when you are in the exam. Well, first of all, running out of time, and perhaps because of that, not attempting all questions. It is much easier to get half, 50% of all of the questions right in order to score your overall 50% than to only do 50% of the questions and need 100%, need everything right. So do have a go at absolutely everything. So to help you with that timing, think about using your scratch pad in your exam to jot down your finish time for each section and then stick to it. That's the important thing. That's the hard thing, sticking to it. Not providing workings, I think we've talked about that a little bit today already. So get into the habit now, but really importantly, do reference them. Show your marker where your number comes from. Not reading the question, that's RTQ, and answering the question, ATQ. So you must make sure that you read the question and answer it. And what you can do to help with that is when you are in that practice platform and you're playing with it and you're learning how it works, look at the software highlighter tool and use it. Start using it to highlight important parts of the question so that you make sure you are answering what you have been asked. And finally, another problem, not grabbing those easy marks first. Again, we've talked about that a little bit today. It's absolutely crucial. So practice the approach we've talked about already to those section C questions now. A few more common mistakes when writing your answer. In terms of analysis questions, we commonly see that there is a lack of structure. Now, structure is a really important way, I'm talking headings here, a really important way to help your marker. So start any analysis answer by creating a structure of headings that you then want to pad out. Another problem with analysis questions is not explaining why something has happened. So just saying, I don't know, gross profit margins increased from 25% to 30%, full stop. That is not going to get you a mark. It's not going to get you anything like half a mark even. So what you must do after stating your fact is either explain, link it to something else. You might link it to an increase or a decrease in revenue, for example, or think about the future. What's the impact on the future? Will it go up? Will it go down? Do we have some history that we can refer to when we're trying to extrapolate what happens in the future? So fact plus ELF. State a fact, explain it, link it, talk about the future. That's how you'll access a mark. Another problem is not concluding. Make sure you add a conclusion into your skeleton, add a heading, and then it will prompt you to do your conclusion. We've seen that'll get you a mark. For group accounts preparation questions, consolidation questions, a couple of problems we see. First of all, only including a percentage of the subsidiaries items in the consolidated SoftPure SPL. So say we only owned 80% of the sub, only including 80% of assets, 80% of income. That's absolutely incorrect. You must make sure you add 100% in, regardless of the ownership. As long as it's a subsidiary, we add 100% of assets, liabilities, income, and expenses. And the second problem, it's really easy to miss this one. If you are doing a consolidated statement of profit or loss, it's really easy to forget that add-on where you allocate the profits or the total comprehensive income between the owners of the parent and the NCI. So for that one, just get into the habit now of structuring that into your pro forma. So just a few kind of quick fire common mistakes there for you to avoid. Now, you're hopefully aware that there is a new mock that is available on the practice platform that you can have a go to help with your studies towards the March sitting. So I have a little poll for you now about this mock. I want to know really how many of you know about the mock and know in effect when it will be released or when it has been released. So you've got some dates there to choose from. So let me just ask you to quickly choose. When do you think this mock was or will be released, or are you not sure? Go ahead and submit your answer whenever you're ready, if you would. That's a few answers now coming through. Okay. Yeah, that's just about half of you now answered, so let's have a look. 47.5% of you have no idea. However, the next biggest number got it right. So it was yesterday, 12th of February. So that mock is available now. So we've talked about the value of practice, practice, practice. So please, 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 can I urge you to jump onto the practice platform when you feel ready to do so and have a go at that mock. Now, not only is that mock available, but there are also debrief videos available when you have attempted it to just help explain things to you. So that's my next question. You might not be aware of them. You might be aware of them. When are those mock debrief videos released onto the ACCA YouTube channel? So again, go ahead and make your selection if you're not sure. You can learn from this. Just wait for some answers to come through. Bit slower here, a bit slower. Maybe you're less sure about this one. Okay. Again, that's just over half now have come through. So let's see what you think. And again, the majority of you have no idea, but the second largest grouping of you have got it right there. 15th of February, so the back end of this week. So the mock was released yesterday. Give you an opportunity to have a go. Those debrief videos released at the end of this week. So again, can I just really urge you to have a look at those and practice, please, because practice really does make perfect when it comes to the FR exam. Okay, what I want to do now then is I just want to jump into the Q&As that have come through. So I've managed to kind of throw out some answers to everybody as we have been going through various parts of this webinar, but let me just pick up some of the common things that are coming through now. So somebody said, I've got 180 minutes for the whole paper. How should I apportion that? You keep talking about time management, right? It's 1.8 minutes per mark. So you must make sure that you spend 54 minutes on section A, 18 minutes on each section B question, and then it's 36 minutes, isn't it, on each section C question. And really important, you stick to that. So 1.8 minutes per mark is your basic rule. I've also got a lot of people saying things like, oh, how do I do an interpretation question? How do I learn interpretation? And actually the best way to learn interpretation and analysis is to practice, I'm afraid. So once you've got a hang of ratios and what ratios mean, it's practice, practice, practice. Because one of the key things we've seen this coming from the examiner is making sure that you are referring to the scenario. So the only way that you can kind of do that, learn that, is through practicing. So my key things when you are doing an interpretation question is, first of all, set up your skeleton structure with headings according to whatever the question is. It might be position and performance, for example. Then add a heading for conclusion. Look at how many marks are available for the written section and decide how many points you want to make under each heading on the basis that 1 point is 1 mark, and one of those will go to the conclusion. And then for each point, each mark that you want to score under each heading, state a fact and explain it, develop it. That's the key thing, develop it. A couple of questions also come through saying, how much should I write? Actually, it's not the quantity, it's the quality that's really, really important. So you don't have to write loads. It's actually easier for the marker to follow if you are very succinct and very to the point. As long as you are providing the explanations, you can access the marks. The problem is when you only say, this has happened, that has happened, and you don't say why, or you say why in a generic way without referencing the specific scenario. So lots of questions around interpretation. I know it's an area that a lot of people are not very, very keen on at all. Again, some questions about showing workings in cells, hiding your working away in a cell and doing the calculation. Just to reiterate what I said earlier, that's okay, it will be marked, but there is no way that you can label the numbers, and so you are not helping the marker to give you own figure rule marks. So I personally would write out the calculation in a bracketed format. Can we use short form? So can we write, for example, PAT for profit after tax, GW for goodwill? Yes, you absolutely can, but try and stick to the more common ones. If it's something a little bit random that you've made up, then maybe put the longer form in a bracket just to show the marker what you're referring to, and after that use the short form. But you are not going to lose marks for abbreviating, as long as it's understandable. You are not going to lose marks for spelling errors. You are not going to lose marks for grammatical errors. That's another couple of questions that have been coming through there. A few people have said, is there any possibility that in section C both questions will be accounts preparation questions? No, you will have some analysis, you will have interpretation. A few people have also said, is there any way that both Section C questions will just be on individual companies, not groups? Again, no, groups is a major part of the syllabus. You will see a groups question in Section C. So lots and lots of questions. What's the best order of answer? I think this is probably going to be my last question because we're just about on time. What's the best order to answer your exam? That is very personal. Can I suggest that you try a few exams, try doing CBA, ABC, see what works for you, see what makes you feel more comfortable. This is your exam. Okay, Martin, I think I have to stop there.
Thank you, Kara. That's all the time that we had for the session today. Much appreciated for your insights and breaking down the examiner's report for us. So just a quick reminder to all our attendees that the resources that we've been referring to are on the resources button that you can see on your screen. Please feel free to click on that button and you'll find access to those. So the pre-match mock and debrief support, the examiner's reports, the technical articles, all those are resources that are useful for you. Someone asked where they can access the mock exam. So log into the ACCA practice platform, go to the ACCA official resources under FR practice exams. You should see the pre-match 2024 mock exam. So thank you very much, Kara. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending and putting in your questions. I hope you found this useful. And please remember, you can always watch this recording again. You should receive an email tomorrow with that link to access the recording. Thank you so much and best of luck from everyone here at ACCA.